at him! Someone should throw him back on the street where he belongs. I'm so sorry for what they said, sir. Please don't listen to them. Let me help you up.
Thank you, my daughter. May God bless your kind heart.
There's a thing I've noticed about people who grew up with very little. The good ones never forget it, and the ones who forget it were never really humbled by it in the first place. I learned that lesson twice. Once from a woman I'll call Whitney, and once from a man everyone in her city stopped seeing long before he disappeared from their sight. If you're new here, welcome. I'm glad you found your way to Lizio, where we tell the stories that live in the space between what people show and what they carry. This one starts on an ordinary Thursday evening, outside a hotel that didn't used to have a name worth mentioning. The Grand Meridian sat on the corner of Karaoke Avenue like it had always belonged there, all gold trim and glass doors and a driveway that curved just so, the kind of curve architects charge extra for, valets in white gloves, a doorman who'd memorized the names of anyone worth knowing. Whitney Njoroge had been coming here for 2 years, ever since her firm started handling the hotel's PR contracts, and she still felt a small thrill walking in. Not because of the marble, but because she remembered a version of herself that couldn't have afforded to look at the menu. She was 31. She wore a beige dress that had cost more than her mother's, monthly pension and less than she pretended it had, and she was 30 minutes late to meet 3 women who would notice both facts and mention neither. "You look like you fought traffic and lost," said Ngozi, the first to spot her, laughing as she came down the hotel steps. "I fought traffic and won, barely." Whitney air-kissed her, then Sadie, then Chiamaka, the 3 of them arranged on the top step, like they'd been posed there by a photographer who understood status. They'd known each other since university, a group with the particular chemistry of women who'd once shared bunk beds and instant noodles, and now shared a driver on nights out, because it looked better arriving together. Whitney loved them the way you love people. You'd outgrown a little without noticing exactly when it happened. "The car's coming," Chiamaka said, checking her phone. 10 minutes. "Should we?" That was when the old man reached the bottom of the steps. He came from the direction of the service road, not the main entrance, moving slowly, one hand trailing along the low wall for balance. He was thin in the way that made his shirt hang wrong. And the shirt itself had been white once, you could tell. The way you can tell a wall used to be a different color underneath the grime. His trousers were torn at the ankle. He carried nothing. No bag, no cane, nothing, which somehow made him look more exposed than if he had. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the building. "Oh my God," Sade said, not quietly. "Is he going to try to come in here?" "He's probably looking for the kitchen entrance," Ngozi said. "Someone should tell him." The old man's foot caught the edge of a raised paving stone, the kind of imperfection nobody notices until it takes something from them. And he went down hard, one knee first, then a hand, then the rest of him folding sideways, onto the stone with a sound that made Whitney's stomach drop before her mind caught up to why. And her 3 friends laughed. Not cruelly, exactly, or that's what they would have said if anyone had asked them to explain it later. It was the reflexive laugh of people who'd been raised to find the unexpected funny before they'd finished, deciding how they felt about it. Sadie actually pointed the way you point at something absurd. A dog wearing sunglasses, a man slipping on a banana peel in a cartoon. Chiamaka had her phone half raised before she caught herself. "Careful, Uncle," Ngozi called out. And there was an edge of mockery in Uncle that wouldn't have been there if she'd meant it kindly. Whitney was already moving. She didn't remember deciding to. 1 second, she was standing at the top of the steps in shoes that weren't built for running. And the next, she was crouched beside him on the stone, her hand under his elbow, her dress riding up in a way she'd care about in an hour, but didn't care about now. "I've got you," she said. "Take your time." Up close, he smelled of dust and something like cedar, sawdust maybe, ground into the fabric of him so deep it had become part of his smell, rather than something on top of it. His hands, when they gripped her forearm to steady himself, were enormous, not fat, but built, the knuckles thick as walnuts, calloused in ridges that told her these hands had done real work for longer than she'd been alive. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, oddly at odds with the panic of the fall. "Clumsy of me. It's the stone, not you. It's uneven right there. I've almost gone down on it myself." That wasn't true. She'd never noticed the stone before in her life. But it felt important in that moment to give him something other than pity. Behind her, Sadi's laughter had died into something more uncomfortable. The particular silence of people realizing they're being watched enjoying something they shouldn't have enjoyed. "Whitney, the car's here," Chiamaka said too brightly. "Give me a minute. We're going to be late for the reservation." "Give me a minute, Chi." She got the old man to his feet. He was taller standing than he'd looked collapsed on the ground, taller than Whitney by a head. And despite the dirt and the torn trouser cuff, there was something in the way he held his spine straight, unapologetic. That didn't match the rest of the picture. "I don't need looking after," he said, not unkindly, brushing at his sleeve. "I've fallen before. I'll fall again. It's what these old knees are for now, apparently." "Do you have somewhere to be?" Whitney asked. He looked at her for a moment before answering, and something in the look made her feel, absurdly, like she was the one being assessed. "I was looking at the building," he said. "I do that sometimes. Old habit. Do you want to sit down somewhere? There's a bench just past the fountain." "Whitney!" Ngosi's voice now lower, closer, a hand on her shoulder that was meant to feel gentle and didn't. "We really do need to go. You can't fix. I mean, there are people whose job this is. The hotel has staff for this kind of thing." "This kind of thing?" Whitney felt the words land somewhere under her ribs. "He's not a spill, Ngozi. He's a person." "I didn't say." "I know what you said." The old man watched this exchange with an expression Whitney couldn't quite read. Not offense, not quite amusement, something more patient than either, like a man watching weather he'd seen roll through before and knew wouldn't last. "Your friends are right to want their dinner," he said to Whitney, gently, as if he were the one comforting her. "Go on, I'll be fine. I'm not leaving you," sitting on a sidewalk with a bleeding knee. She hadn't noticed the knee until she said it, a thin line of blood tracking down into the torn fabric. "There's a first aid kit in my car. Let me at least clean that." "Whitney!" Sade this time, arms crossed. "This isn't, I mean, look at him. You don't know this man. He could be what, Sade?" Nobody finished the sentence. Nobody had to. The unfinished sentence sat there between them, uglier for being unfinished, and Whitney watched something shift in her old friends' faces. Not shame, not yet, just the faint discomfort of people watching themselves from a slight distance and not entirely liking the view. The old man, for his part, seemed entirely unbothered. He was looking past all of them now, back up at the hotel's facade, at the exact place where a carved stone lintel arched over the main doors, a detail Whitney had walked beneath 200 times without once looking up. "They don't make lintels like that anymore," he said, mostly to himself. "Nobody has the patience for the joinery." The dinner reservation was lost. Whitney's friends went without her, and the drive to the restaurant was, by Chiamaka's later account, extremely quiet. Whitney sat with the old man on the bench past the fountain, a small first aid kit from her glove compartment open between them, and cleaned the cut on his knee while he told her, without being asked, that his name was Baba Solomon, and that he'd worked with wood and stone for 51 years, though his hands didn't let him do much of either anymore. "You built things," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I built this," he said, and nodded up at the hotel behind them. She laughed before she could stop herself. Not unkindly, just surprised. "The Grand Meridian? Not this version. This is the third skin on an old body." He turned his enormous, ruined hands over, examining them the way you'd examine a tool you were deciding whether to retire. "There was a hall here once, before the hotel, before the hotel before that." "A community hall?" I was 26. It took me and 11 other men 14 months, and we did the roof trusses by hand because the crane they promised us never came. He looked up at the modern glass tower rising above them now. They kept the foundation. Nobody tells you that when they rebuild a thing. Sometimes what's underneath is the only part that was ever really yours. Whitney sat back on her heels, the antiseptic wipe forgotten in her hand. Why were you here tonight? Just looking at it? Baba Solomon was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet, his face did something complicated. Not quite sadness, not quite pride, some third thing that didn't have an easy name. I come most Thursdays, he said finally. There's a man who manages the grounds crew who lets me sit by the old fountain wall. The original one, the one they didn't tear out. It's the only part of the whole property that remembers me. He glanced at her, and there was a dry humor in it that caught her off guard. I don't imagine your friends believed that a man dressed like this built anything besides trouble. They didn't mean. They meant exactly what they meant, he said without heat. I've been poor, and I've been looked at like this before. It's not new information. What's new? And here he paused, studying her with an attention that felt suddenly much heavier than the conversation had been a moment ago, is that you didn't look away. Whitney didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. She finished bandaging his knee instead, her hands steadier than she felt. Let me drive you home, she said. Please, it's the least I can do. He hesitated. She would think about that hesitation later, turn it over trying to understand what it had actually meant, and then nodded once, like a man agreeing to something larger than a ride. On one condition, he said, pushing himself upright with a hand on the bench, refusing her offered arm. You tell me why you stopped. Really? Not the answer you give your friends tomorrow when they ask you to explain yourself, the true one. Whitney thought about it the whole walk to her car. Because my grandmother used to clean offices in a building not unlike this one, she said finally, unlocking the passenger door for him. And I used to wait for her outside. And I saw how people walked past her like she was part of the architecture. I promised myself if I ever had a life where I could choose to see people, instead of walking past them, I would. Baba Solomon lowered himself carefully into the seat, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Quieter, more deliberate, like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd nearly forgotten it was there. I have a proposition for you, he said. And I should warn you, it isn't small, and it isn't simple. And by the time I've finished explaining it, you may wish you'd let your friends drag you to dinner instead. Whitney paused with her hand on the ignition. Try me, she said. He turned to look at her fully then, and in the dashboard light his eyes were sharp in a way that had nothing to do with age at all. I built 41 buildings in this city with these hands, he said. Halls, schools, 3 churches, a clinic that's still standing after a flood took half the street around it. I have no children who want the work. And a foundation with my name on it that's been quietly dying for lack of anyone, willing to actually learn the trade instead of just inheriting the title. I've been coming to that fountain wall every Thursday for 11 months, watching people walk past me, trying to decide if there was a single person left in this city who'd stop for a stranger without knowing what stopping might be worth to them. He let that sit for a moment. Tonight, for the first time in 11 months, he said, someone did. If Baba Solomon's story is landing with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to Lizio, because there's a lot more of Whitney's story still to come. Whitney didn't sleep much that night. She'd driven Baba Solomon to a modest house on the edge of Ridgeway. Not the slum her friends would have imagined. Not the mansion the word foundation might have suggested. But a small, well-kept bungalow with a workshop out back. Tools hanging in neat rows on a pegboard he could no longer use the way he used to. A woman named Grace, his late brother's daughter, lived with him and looked after him. And she'd opened the door with the particular relief of someone who'd been worried and was too proud to say so. He does this, Grace had said quietly, while Baba Solomon made his slow way inside. Goes and sits by that fountain. I tell him it's not good for his knees, sitting on stone that long. He doesn't listen. Does he go looking for someone? Whitney had asked. though she already suspected the answer. Grace had looked at her for a long moment. He goes looking for the right kind of someone. He's very particular about what that means. Whitney thought about that sentence for most of the drive home, and most of the night after. The proposition, when Baba Solomon had finally laid it out in full in her car, was this: the Solomon Trust, a small foundation that trained young tradespeople in masonry, carpentry, and traditional building techniques that were vanishing from the city faster than anyone was documenting. Them had been running on fumes for 3 years, not for lack of money. There was money, modest but real, invested carefully by a man who'd never trusted banks with his whole confidence. What it lacked was a director, someone to run it, grow it, decide who it trained and how, someone who understood both the trade's dignity and the world's indifference to it. "I'm not asking you because you're clever," he'd told her, with a bluntness that had startled her. "I'm sure you're clever. I'm asking because you stopped. Cleverness I can find in 100 applicants. What you did tonight. I've been looking for 11 months and hadn't found once." "I don't know anything about masonry," Whitney had said, "or carpentry. I do communications, Baba, press releases, client relationships. Then you'll learn the trade from men who still remember it. And you'll do the part I never could. Make people care again." He'd tapped the dashboard once, like punctuating a sentence. "I'm not offering you money, if that's what worries you. I'm offering you work. Hard, unglamorous work. For less than you make now. Doing something that will outlive both of us if it's done right. Sleep on it." I'm not a man in a hurry anymore. By Friday morning, Whitney's phone had 11 messages in the group chat, none of which she'd answered. "Said, are you okay? That was so random last night." "Ngozi, we didn't mean anything by it. You know that, right?" "Chiamaka, call me when you're free. I feel bad, honestly." She read them standing in her kitchen with coffee going cold in her hand, and found, to her own surprise, that she didn't feel angry so much as tired. The specific tiredness of realizing a friendship has been running on assumptions that no longer hold. She went to see Baba Solomon again that afternoon, without calling ahead. Grace let her into the workshop, where he was sitting on a low stool, running his thumb along the grain of an unfinished chair leg with the absent tenderness of a man greeting an old friend. "I have questions," Whitney said, "before I say yes to anything." "Good," Baba Solomon said, not looking up. "A person who agrees before asking questions isn't someone I'd trust to run anything." "Why me, really? Not the version you already gave me. The version underneath that." He set the chair leg down and looked at her properly, the way he had outside the hotel, that assessing look that made her feel exposed and, strangely, safe at the same time. 11 months ago," he said. "My nephew, Grace's cousin, a good boy, but restless, asked to take over the trust. I said no. Not because he wasn't capable, because when I told him what the work actually was, years of it, unglamorous, underpaid, thankless most days, he asked me how quickly he could turn it into something bigger, something that would put his name somewhere people could see it." He shook his head slowly. "I built 41 buildings and never once put my name on a single one. The lintel you saw at the hotel, I carved that myself, and there's no plaque, no signature, nothing. That's not modesty. That's the trade. You build the thing so it outlives the need for anyone to remember who built it. And you think I understand that. I think you're the first person in 11 months who stopped to help a stranger without first calculating what it would cost you socially to do it. Your friends did the math instantly. You didn't do the math at all." He picked the chair leg back up. "That's rarer than talent, Whitney. Talent I can teach. That I cannot." The complication, when it came, didn't come from Baba Solomon at all. It came from Whitney's own life, 3 days later, in the form of a phone call from her boss. The PR firm had just landed a retainer, not from the Grand Meridian this time, but from a much larger client, a regional hospitality group looking to expand across 4 cities. It was the kind of account that built careers. Whitney's name had been put forward to lead it. A promotion, a significant raise, her photo eventually on the firm's website under Senior Partners. everything. In short, that the version of herself from 5 years ago would have wept with relief to hear. She sat in her car in the parking garage afterward for a long time, engine off, both offers sitting side by side in her mind like two doors she couldn't see past. She called Grace, not really sure why, except that Grace had seemed like someone who understood Baba Solomon better than anyone. "He won't pressure you," Grace said when Whitney explained. "That's not how he works. But I'll tell you something he told me once, when I was deciding whether to stay and look after him or take a job my mother wanted for me in Nairobi." Grace paused. "He said the tragedy isn't choosing the safe thing. The tragedy is choosing it and pretending afterward you never had a choice at all." Whitney sat with that for a long time after they hung up. She thought about the hospital corridor where her grandmother had died 11 years ago, a woman who'd cleaned other people's buildings for 30 years and never once had anyone offer her a building of her own to shape. She thought about the lintel over the hotel doors, carved by hands nobody thanked, holding up a roof under which strangers ate dinners that cost more than a week of her grandmother's wages. She thought about the particular, hollow satisfaction of a job title on a firm's website and set it mentally next to the particular, quiet weight of Baba Solomon's voice saying that's rarer than talent. She went back to the workshop the next morning. "I have a counter-proposal," she told him, before he could say anything. He raised an eyebrow, amused despite himself. "Go on. Give me 18 months. I'll keep my client work part-time to fund myself while I learn the trust from the ground up. The trade, the books, the people, all of it. No shortcuts. No title until I've earned one. If at the end of 18 months you don't think I understand what you actually do, you tell me honestly, and I walk away and you keep looking. But if I do understand it," she took a breath, "then it's mine to carry properly, not as a favor to a man who helped me feel good about myself for one Thursday evening." Baba Solomon studied her for a long moment, and something in his weathered face shifted. Not quite a smile, but close enough to its neighborhood. 18 months, he said. "You'll hate me by month 4. Everyone does. The trade doesn't care how clever you are. I'm counting on it." She told her friends 2 weeks later, over a dinner she organized herself this time, at a small restaurant none of them would have chosen. Said was the one who finally asked the question underneath all their careful small talk. "Are you actually doing this? The old man's foundation thing?" "I am." "Whitney, you'd be walking away from a partnership track. For I don't even know how to say this without it sounding like what you were thinking outside the hotel," Whitney said, not unkindly but not softening it either. "You can say it." "I already know what it sounded like." The table went quiet. Ngozi looked down at her plate. Chiamaka's jaw worked like she wanted to defend herself and couldn't quite find the ground to stand on. "I laughed," Ngozi said finally quietly. "I've thought about it every day since. I don't even know why I laughed. It wasn't funny. Nothing about it was funny." "I know," Whitney said. "I think about that too. Why the first reaction, for all of us, growing up the way we did, was to laugh at a man who'd built more with his hands than any of us will build in our lives. I don't have a clean answer for it. I don't think there is one. I just know I don't want to be someone whose first reaction is that. Ever again." Nobody said anything for a while. Then Sade, in a smaller voice than Whitney had heard from her in years, asked, "Can I meet him sometime?" "Properly, not like that." "I think he'd like that," Whitney said. "He's not interested in punishing anyone. He just wants people who'll actually look." 18 months later, on a Thursday evening, Whitney stood at the fountain wall outside the Grand Meridian, the original stone, the part they'd kept, with a small brass plate in her hands, the first one the trust had ever allowed to be installed anywhere. Baba Solomon watched from his bench, Cain resting against his knee now, Grace beside him. He hadn't wanted the plaque. She'd fought him for a week over it. It read simply, "Built by hands that are rarely thanked." "Look closer. You still didn't put a name on it," he said when she came to sit beside him. "Wasn't supposed to be about a name," Whitney said. "You taught me that." He was quiet for a while, watching the evening traffic slide past the hotel's golden light, watching well-dressed people come and go beneath. A lintel none of them would ever look up to notice. "My grandmother used to say something," Whitney said eventually, "that the people who build the world are rarely the ones standing in the photograph of it." She looked at him. "I used to think that was just something sad you said about being poor. I don't think that anymore." Baba Solomon didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had the same unhurried quality it had the night she'd found him on the ground outside a building he'd built with his own hands and never once been thanked for. "No," he said. "It's not sad. It's just true. The trick isn't fixing that people forget. The trick is becoming someone who remembers anyway." Somewhere behind them, a valet opened a car door for a woman in heels who didn't glance at the old man on the bench at all. Whitney did. She always would now. That, more than anything else, was what the last 18 months had actually built. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know which part hit hardest. Drop it in the comments. And if you're new here, stick around, subscribe to Lizio, because there are a lot more people worth looking closer at.